Hello, my name is AJ Goldsby. I'm a life master from Pensacola, Florida, and I'm bringing you today another video in my series of videos on the greatest chess games ever played. And this game here is the game between Mikhail Botvinnik and Vassily Smyslov. Some people say Smyslov, a lot of Americans say that, but I understand that's an incorrect pronunciation. The correct way to pronounce Smyslov's name is actually Vassily Smyslov. But again, some Americans say Smyslov, so we know who we're talking about. And Botvinnik was white. Vassily Smyslov was black. And this game was played in 1954. This is the 14th match game. And before I go on here, I just wanted to let you know that this game is the favorite of many masters. It's been rated highly in about 5 or 6 books that mention some of the best chess games ever played. Several books I think deserve mention here. The first book is a book that originally picked the 100 greatest chess games ever played. It was by Grandmasters John Nunn, John Ems, and also FIDE Master Graham Burgess. That's one of my favorite books. I still enjoy looking at that book. And they've updated it now, so now it has more than 100 games. But that's easily a great book. And if you don't have that book, you really should get it. I also like the book The 100 Best by Andy Soltis. And to me, Soltis is probably one of the best writers of this generation. And I say this as a compliment. I think he's an extremely good writer. He understands writing better than most chess players. I mean, his writing is nearly flawless. Whereas a lot of chess grandmasters, they use incomplete sentences and that sort of thing. So Soltis is by far probably the best chess pure writer of this generation. And maybe not the strongest player. He's still a very strong player. He's a grandmaster. Played in U.S. championships in his prime. And anyway, he wrote the book 100 Best. And that is probably one of my absolute favorite books in my entire chess library. And I have one of the biggest libraries probably in the state of Florida, to my understanding. And there are several other books, too, that are great games. There's a little blue book. I don't even remember the name of the author off the top of my head. But it sold very well. And it's a very popular book. And he picked some of the best chess games ever played. There was another book by Reuben Fine, which was written, I believe, back in the 30s or the 40s, but he's passed away now. But that book is rather outdated. It's not because it's bad or the analysis isn't any good, but there's a lot of games that are not included in that book because when he wrote that book, for example, Bobby Fischer hadn't even, I don't think he'd even played his, greatest. A lot of the games that we know of today weren't even played yet. But anyway, so I just want to mention this book. This book is highly rated in all three of those, the three main books I mentioned there. The one by Ems, Burgess, and Nunn, the book by Soltis, and also the little blue book. This game is in all three of those books. This book is, this game is a favorite of many Soviet masters. I saw the game the first time when I was a very young person. I was very low rated then, and I looked at it probably every day, literally for 3 months. That's not an exaggeration. That was in the very, very early 70s. And it just blew me away back then. It still blows me away today. Soltis ranks this game number 11 in his book out of the when he picks the 100 best of all of the games of the 20th century. And a lot of Soviet masters have said, grandmasters have said that this game is probably one of the best games ever played in a world championship match. Also, too, I believe, now that this was a personal story, well, first, before I relate that, Polish Soviet Masters, it was a magazine back in the 50s, they were asked to pick 3 of the best games ever played in a modern world championship match, and this game showed up just in about every 3 of the Masters collections. Now, I'm not able to confirm this 100%, but a friend who was a good friend of Jack Collins, he's passed away now, but he told me many years ago that Collins had told him, related to him, that this game was also a favorite of young Bobby Fischer. Smyslov, in his one interview, he picked this as one of his all-time best games. He also told the famous Russian chess historian Isaac Linder, some people say Isaac Linder, that this game was, his best, and also gave him more aesthetic pleasure to play than any other game he played. So I think that's about enough for the introduction there. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that about the game as a whole. But this is a great game. We're looking at it from black side because black wins. Again, this is a game between, I believe this is the 14th match game. It's between Mikhail Botvinnik, who was the world champion, and Vassily Smyslov, or some people say Smyslov. And it was played in 1954 in their world championship match. Again, this is game number 14. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into the game. D4, knight f6, c4, g6. Starts off as a King's Indian. Of course, there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of King's Indian games been played at the Grandmaster level. By now, today, the King's Indian is pretty well accepted in Grandmaster practice, whereas maybe it's not as popular today, actually, as it was, say, a few years ago. But in the 80s, it was extremely popular. You see hundreds of games, being played, every year at the highest level. Today, grandmasters seem more interested in playing D4, D5. I don't know if that's just a fad or if there's something fundamentally wrong with the King's Indian. But I know Kramnik has given the King's Indian a very hard time when he plays the white side of the King's Indian. It's almost like a forced win for white. So there's, and also Kasparov, when he was active, he was he played both the black side of the King's Indian and was also very active on the white side of the King's Indian. Played very well from both sides of the board. But anyway, this is game starts off as a King's Indian. Prior to the 1930s, the King's Indian was not accepted at all. It's basically a hyper-modern opening. Very briefly, hyper-modern openings, players try to control the center with their pieces. The emphasis is more on piece play and pushing pawns later, whereas in classical openings, you see controlling the center with pawns. Good example of openings that are classical openings would be like E4, E5, or D4, D5. So anyway, this is a hyper-modern defense. And Botvinnik plays a fianchetto system. This is still a very good system, still being played today by grandmasters today. I saw a very interesting game. I haven't finished analyzing it. It was played just several months ago. It was played by two 2700s in this line. And I may make a web page for that game if it turns out to be completely sound. It certainly is an extremely interesting chess game. It's a long way from being perfect, but it's very, very interesting. But anyway, this is the fianchetto system. There's dozens of systems that white can play today. I mean, there's almost too many different systems to name. Some of the more, the classical system, the fianchetto system, the Samish, and those are some of the more popular systems that white can play. But anyway, G3 is the fianchetto system. Black plays bishop G7, bishop G2, black castles kingside. And, of course, now we're into the King's Indian proper with the pawn being fianchettoed. Now, I will say that if black plays an early D5, sometimes in some lines, then that could be considered to be really a transposition of the Grunfeld, but we're not going to see that in this game. One of the main ideas I just want to mention briefly is, people ask me all the time, as a master, why is the King's Indian so popular? And I think to understand that, you have to understand one of the basic motifs of the King's Indian is that many times black gets to attack on the king's side, and a lot of time, black doesn't even try to hold the queen side. He can get easily overwhelmed on that side of the board, but the whole idea is that black tries to attack on the king side. A very, very good game, if you want to see a game that I think illustrates that concept very, very clearly, and I have a webpage on this game, is the game between Viktor Korchnoi and Bobby Fischer, and it was played at the Herceg Novi tournament. It was the World Blitz Championship in Herceg Novi in 1970. So that was an extremely interesting game, and I do have a webpage on that game. You should be able to find it with Google. Just type in chess Goldsby and the two players, Korchnoi and Fischer, and it should come right up. But anyway, and I may do a video on that game next. But anyway, this is one of the reasons that the King's Indian is so popular. A lot of younger players who don't know how to play it, and they just see black getting cramped and getting smoked, and they turn around and ask me, well, as a master, well, Mr. Goldsby, why do players play the King's Indian? What's the primary motivation, or why would you want to play the King's Indian? And again, one of the answers is it takes a lot of preparation, but eventually black's going to go for a kingside attack. And again, a good game that illustrates that principle very well is a game I just mentioned. All right, moving on here, knight c3, d6, knight f3. Now today we see a lot more systems, which I call the Pano system. You see lines like a6 and knight c6 and rook b8, and that's would be called, I guess, the modern Pano variation. That's an extremely popular variation, and a good game that shows maybe this shows a different way that that King's Indian play would be the game Botvinnik-Smyslov, and that was the fight Olympiad in the 5th round in Bled, Slovenia in 2002. But I just wanted to mention that game because that was a game that I did a lot of research on, and I'm just going to skip a lot of the lines here because I have a ton of opening analysis here, and I'm not going to the video to me is not about analysis. I have a web page for this game, and I'll put the link for the web page just below in the video box, the part of that says show more. And again, that analysis is pretty thorough. My project to find the 10 best games and make a web page for each games really took me the better part of 10, or actually more like 15 years. I worked actively on that project for over 8 years before I completed it. So a lot of work went into those web pages. So definitely if you want to see the analysis, you should definitely check those out. But anyway, white castles, black plays e5. This is standard in the King's Indian. Many times in the King's Indian, you'll see white advance to play d5. Now in this particular variation, white is not going to advance his pawn to d5, although he could. The main reason being is that it's thought that with the pawn on d5, then white's bishop on g2 is not so effective. So in this particular system and in this particular game, white tries to keep the center more or less fluid. In other words, he doesn't fix the center with d4, d5. So anyway, e4, and black plays c6. Now this is really an older system. This is a system that was popular more in the 50s. I don't see very many examples of this line being played today. I don't know if that's because somebody's looked it up in a computer and they busted this line, or there's one game that stands out head and shoulders above all the other games. I have some of the latest books on the King's Indian. In fact, I have just about all the books ever printed on the King's Indian. I have the very latest book on the King's Indian. And in none of those books did I find any mention of a game that would shed some light on this particular situation. And to me the video is not about analysis. It's more about just color commentary for me. That's how I try to do my videos. And if you want to see the analysis, by all means consult the web page. The web page is very detailed and literally the result literally over a solid year worth of work. Anyway, so this is c6, and this is a very good move because it keeps white's knight off of d5, and again black also is trying to keep the center fluid and that type of thing. A lot of my students say they would want to play c5 here, and that's probably a bad move for a couple reasons. White could go ahead and play d5, or more importantly, he might simply exchange on e5, and then he's got a wonderful outpost for his knight on d5. So I would say that that's not very accurate. So the c6 move, the main drawback to c6 is black is often left with a backward d pawn in the open d file. Maybe that's the main reason that a lot of grandmasters do not play this variation today. But anyway, this is the older system, c6. White plays bishop e3. Again, this is the way that this system was played back then. It's a very nice move, very flexible move. And black plays knight g4. Now today I will say that I think the modern line today is white plays first h3 and doesn't even allow knight g4 anymore. I think that I'm very sure at the top level that's how the Power Book gives, the latest version of the Power Book gives the correct way to play this opening. White plays h3 and then bishop e3. But back in those days, bishop e3 first was considered correct. It was considered a waste of time to play h3 first. But that just shows you how theory evolved. This was prior to computers. Today things happen at a much more accelerated rate. Really, the players of today cannot appreciate how theory evolved. I grew up with theory long before computers got good, and you'd see one move played over and over and over again, and it wasn't until maybe a game came along and it was considered completely refuted before you'd see a transition of opening theory. Opening theory would finally change and a new move would come along. But I just will let you know, by surveying the database, that bishop e3 was by far, and I have some older books, that was by far considered the correct way to play the system back in those days. That was back in the 40s and 50s. So anyway, Botvinnik, in keeping with theory of the time, he plays bishop e3, and Smyslov plays knight g4, and that's an exclam. I really like that move, and it's one of the reasons that Smyslov won this game. I mean, I don't care if you say Smyslov or Smyslov. A lot of people, I would like to pronounce his name the way it's supposed to be pronounced, which is Smyslov. But unfortunately, a lot you say Smyslov, and a lot of players in the U.S. don't even know who you're talking about. They only know him by the by the Americanization of his name, Smyslov. But anyway, Smyslov plays this game very well, and he basically has prepared very deeply. Bishop G5, Queen B6. That's again a new move. That was a new move, I believe, in the either late 40s or 50s. I read an article and they said that was first analyzed in a Shachmatny bulletin back in the late 1940s, but wasn't played until the actual in Grandmaster Chess until the 1950s. So Smyslov has obviously prepared this variation very carefully and continues to play new moves. And here, again, in keeping with theory, Botvinnik is just going with the theory of time. He plays H3, and that move makes sense. Again, White can't sit idly by. Black can play moves like H6 and F5, and slowly improve his position and also get a good kingside attack going. So White can't just sit on his thumb, so he goes kicks the knight, and that's a natural move. And here we have E takes D4. This was a theoretical novelty, which means a brand new move at the time that this game was played. And I like Soltis's comment here. I'll just simply read it. The ever suspicious Botvinnik was annoyed by this improvement over the previously played move 11 knight gf6, and that's what Soltis writes in his book, and that's been verified. I've verified that. Botvinnik even suspected that he was rather paranoid that some of his trainers had defected to the enemy camp or fed Smyslov all of his opening preparation. That's possible, but I'm not sure. I think that was, if that's ever been documented or not. I will say life in Botvinnik's time in Russia, I mean, that was a time of betrayal and secrets and that kind of thing. It was during the Cold War, it was during the Stalin era, so it was a very repressive time at that time. So I think you have to understand, I don't think Botvinnik was overly paranoid, but I do think he lived in a time when that kind of thing did go on. And probably a little paranoia was, back in those days, was probably a healthy thing. But anyway, Botvinnik, thought for Smyslov to be this well prepared. He thought somebody in his camp must have leaked secrets. But I don't think he was giving Smyslov enough credit for his pre-match preparations. Smyslov wrote in a book later how many months that he worked with trainers and they looked at dozens of different ideas. And I really think this was just Smyslov at one time was one of the active. He played certain systems of the King's Indian. So I think basically that Botvinnik wasn't giving Smyslov or Smyslov enough credit. But anyway, that was a very good move there. And now, knight A4. Again, you can maybe improve on some of these moves with an engine. I'm not going to focus too much on engine moves here. Again, Black's new move in this game was E takes D4. Previously, the knight had been retreated here. Botvinnik's next move seems to be forced. I mean, he can't recapture the pawn for losing a piece. So he plays knight A4, queen A6. H takes G4, and now we have B5. And that's the most energetic move to play. That move actually is not as simple as it might seem, because the calculations for that move, basically Black, if White wants to, Blacks can wind up losing the exchange. And in fact, that's exactly what happens here. So anyway, B5 exclam. Knight takes D4. B takes A4, knight takes C6. Again, that's the most accurate move according to our esteemed writer Soltis. He gives that an exclamation point, as do many other writers here. Black plays queen takes C6. It looks terrible, but it turns out it's the correct move, and it may even be forced if Black doesn't, play. If he plays moves like Bishop B7, White plays knight E7 check, and Fritz says White's just about winning there. Anyway, queen takes C6, E5. Queen takes C4, bishop takes A8, knight takes E5. Now what's happened here? What's happened is that White has won an exchange, but it came at the cost of the bishop pair and a pawn. Well, I'm sorry, not a bishop pair, a very active knight and a pawn. I stand corrected. I'll correct myself there. White still has his two bishops, so it would be impossible for Black to have the bishop pair. But Black has a very active position. He has that knight on E5, and White has a lot of weaknesses, and the big problem that White has is his pieces are not well coordinated, and his rooks don't have much future. And I remember when I first saw this article written about this, it was a photocopy that someone sent me of an old 50s era article, and it said, one writer wrote that, a master, he wrote that he didn't understand how Black wins this game because he has a terrible position at this point. I think he's speaking materialistically, because the simple fact is black's pieces are much more active than white's as a whole, and also too, black has good comp. I mean, he has a knight and a pawn, and white has bad pawn structure, misplaced pieces, and a set of double pawns. So I think overall, I think that black has a very good play compensation here, and that's backed up by the evaluations of programs like Fritz and Houdini, who rate this position as just about equal, or maybe even slightly better for black. Anyway, white's next move is rook c1. Again, Soltis gave that an exclam, and I'll just mention, that's what a lot of the writers wrote. Rook c1. Queen b4 exclam. Again, Soltis gave no comment here, but simply awards this move an exclamation point. I like this move very much because it leads to tremendous complications. And, I could analyze a lot of the various lines. If I got into the analysis of this game and looking at all the sidelines, literally this video would be 5 hours long and no one would want to watch it. But anyway, queen b4, that's striking at the b2 square. Black plays a3. Queen takes b2, exclam. Again, that's a very dangerous move because it puts the queen on a dangerous square. We're about to get into some really wild stuff here. Queen takes a4. And at this point, I will write that Botvinnik had consumed well over an hour. I don't remember exactly from the top of my head, but it was well over an hour, maybe even more than that at this point. Botvinnik, one of his problems was, as a player, he's a very deep thinker, but sometimes he get very far behind on the clock. And now bishop takes, bishop to b7. Not bishop takes, but just bishop to b7. That's a double exclam. It's, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant, daring, and brave moves ever played in the World Championship level. Black's going to have to sacrifice his queen, and I don't think there's no way he could have calculated everything that could have happened from this position. But obviously, Smyslov was obviously capable of calculating very deeply, easily 5 or 10 moves ahead. But I think the sacrifice is complicated enough to there's no way you could have calculated everything. But I think Smyslov did calculate enough to know that more than likely he's going to have plenty of play. He'll give up the queen, but he'll give plenty of play for his sacrifice material. Soltis only gave this move 1 exclam. I've seen other books where they give it 2. I've really got to give this move 2 exclams. Again, going back to that survey that was done back in the 1950s, a lot of grandmasters and very strong Soviet players felt like this was one of the most brilliant games ever played at the World Championship level. So anyway, bishop b7. Now white plays rook b1. That was not the correct move there. The correct move, well, let's just very quickly look at that. I've verified this with several engines. Bishop takes b7, queen takes b7. Some authors give rook b1. Soltis gives a much better line, rook c3, which I think actually originates with Wade and another writer. Knight f3 check, rook takes, queen takes, bishop e7, rook a8, bishop takes d6. And there's no way that white should lose this position, not with correct play. He has a slightly weak king, but other than that, I don't really see any real big problems for white. And that was what should have been played, but that isn't what actually happened there. Other writers have given the following line: bishop takes b7, rook b1, knight there check, queen there, queen a8, and here black is just flat out winning. It used to be, they said, with favorable complications, but if you check it with any engine, black is just clearly on top. But anyway, let's just back up here just a little bit, see if we can find out where we left this one game off here. But anyway, this is where Botvinnik played rook b1. It's not so easy to play. Obviously, if he could have found the line with clear equality, I'm not sure. Only Botvinnik, and he's dead now, he could explain why he didn't play the other line. I'm sure he could have seen at least parts of that line. Why he didn't play that line is really a secret that only rests with Botvinnik. I'm sure he must have thought somehow that he was winning here. It must have been based on some type of miscalculation, because obviously, Smyslov goes ahead and sacks the queen and clearly comes on top. But anyway, this is a great move. The move's clearly inferior. Obviously, the line I just showed you would have led to pretty much equality for white. Maybe black was just a little bit better there. Maybe Botvinnik rather did not correctly appraise the position there. He got that position and thought because of his king jeopardy he was going to be very badly lost there. But anyway, I really can't speak for Botvinnik why he didn't play the correct line, but here he played rook b1. And now Smyslov, it's knight f3 check, king h1, and now you get bishop takes a8 exclam. That's the move later that said Botvinnik either he overlooked or he didn't spend enough time looking at, and that was probably what it's kind of a slow motion sacrifice, and there's not very many examples of this kind of sacrifice in chess. Certainly not too many played at the world championship level and involving a queen sacrifice. So anyway, this is a very interesting move. Rook takes b2. He's got to do that, otherwise he's going to come out materially down. Knight takes f3 check, king h2, knight f3 check, king h3, bishop takes b2. And now the dust is settled, and basically Smyslov in his game 125 Smyslov rather in his book 125 selected games. That was the book that was written later, published much later, right before, just a few years before Smyslov passed away. He wrote it himself. But anyway, Smyslov's excellent book. I highly recommend it. 125 selected games. He writes, the exchanging operation has black brought considerable gains. His 3 minor pieces are more than sufficient compensation for the queen. In addition, the white king continues to come under attack. And that's Smyslov in the book 125 selected games. Just very quickly, black has 3 minor pieces for the queen. Now, I think Botvinnik wrote later that he saw this position and he just thought that, he could, because black isn't very well organized, that he would be able to be okay in this position. I don't know if that's, only Botvinnik can verify that. But anyway, that's what he said. Queen takes a7. And he does have a dangerous outside pass pawn, Bishop e4. That's a good move there. One of the idea there is black could simply play d5 and anchor his light squared bishop, and that knight and bishop, those pieces centralized, are just overwhelming. a4, white's only source of counterplay is his rook pawn. If he does nothing, then he's just going to lose. King g7, rook to d1, bishop e5. And it's very clear now what's happened in the last few moves. Black's managed to reorganize his pieces very effectively, and now has his 3 minor pieces pretty much all protecting each other and guarding a lot of key squares. Queen e7, rook c8, a5. Of course, black continues to push his pawn. Rook c2, king g2, knight d4 check, king f1, bishop to f3, rook b1, knight c6. And here I believe Botvinnik resigned. And the point is that bishop d4 is threatened, and there's very little that white can do about it. Kind of rushed through those last few moves. There's a lot of different things I could have done, and again, didn't want the video to get too long. We're already coming up on close to 30 minutes now. But I think that pretty much concludes my video. Again, Botvinnik threw in the towel here because bishop to d4 is threatened, and there's very little that white can really do about that. If rook b7, then just simply it's a back rank mate with rook c1 check. So other than that, I don't really know how white's going to scare up any counterplay. But I consulted about 10 different books. I have a very detailed web page on this. I hope you will visit my web page, because a lot of time and effort went into the web page. I hope you enjoyed my video. I hope if you really like my videos and my web pages and would like to support my my efforts to continue to do this, to make great chess web pages and also do chess videos that correspond to the web pages, then you'll give me a donation if you want to, if you'd like to. And the way you would do that is go to the PayPal website. That's www.paypal.com, and give a donation under my my account, which is my Yahoo email, which is LifeMasterAJ@yahoo.com, and you can find that email all over my websites. Well, thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed my video. I certainly hope you'll check out maybe just not my video, but also any other videos on this chess game if there are any. And also, too, that you'll consult my webpage. And I hope you enjoyed everything. And I hope maybe you'll even drop me an email and just to let me know what you think of both my webpage and my video. Thank you for watching my video, and have a great day.